So here's what happens. So you reinvent group by starting by identifying the symmetries of a triangle and symbolizing them. Then you start to look at combining pairs of symmetries. And this is going to go fast, and just so you know, I will give references at the end where you could actually learn about this if you actually care about it after I show you all the pictures. So then what happens is there's this transition to calculating with symmetries, with these symbols for symmetries, and based on that, and then looking at other systems, you define group, easy peasy, and then we go on to reinventing isomorphisms, and so that starts by looking at a magical mystery table and asking the question, could that be the symmetries in the equilateral triangle? Usually it's something cute like, I found this table crumpled up on a piece of paper in my office. What do you think? And then, so what happens is, well, you're trying to figure that out, and students find ways to verify this by changing the names of the elements, rearranging the rows, or some combination. And what happens is it becomes obvious that the way to tackle this problem is by forming a bijection. Okay. What's a lot less obvious is how do you distinguish between bijections that actually show you that it is the symmetries of the equilateral triangle and those that don't. And so that's where the follow-up tasks come, and we have them consider correspondences that seem like they ought to work but don't, and then have them give them the beginning of a correspondence, basically assign what you want two generators to go to, and then they have to try and figure out how to finish it. Based on that, students can then figure out what this magical property is and formalize that, and then slap a bijection on the front of it, and then there's a backwards E, basically, and then you have a definition of isomorphism. So that was what I created so that I could graduate in 2004. So result was, I had a nice instructional theory for supporting students in reinventing these two concepts. If I stand here, I can actually read this.
We can hear you.
And then I had some tasks that seemed to work, and I had a PhD. These are all good things. But what they aren't is a curriculum that allow you to teach a group theory course. So when I got to PSU, I wrote a grant so that I could develop a whole group theory course. $628,000 is what I asked for. I had three components. I was going to study students' learning and understanding of group theory concepts. I was going to finish designing the course. There's notice I didn't tell you anything about quotient groups yet. That's kind of important in group theory. And then I was going to design an instrument for investigating students' understanding of these concepts. So basically a concept inventory like Kate made in the future. So what I did was I started teaching. Did I tell about the part how they didn't give it to me?
No, you missed that part.
They didn't love you at first.
They rejected my grant with extreme prejudice. It wasn't marginally considered. They just didn't want to give me money for that. So what I did was I started teaching group theory. So I figured out on the fly how to adapt these materials to teach my own courses. Basically doing what Steffi and Thompson call exploratory teaching. Which I have in print called experimental teaching, incorrectly. Thank you, Aaron Glover, for pointing that out. Anyways, and then I started giving talks at RUME about my abstract algebra stuff. So in 2005, I gave this talk, which was hilarious, by the way. I wrote this talk for two reasons. One is that I made Karen Marangel cry by laughing so hard. And two, I poked fun at a plenary talk in my talk. And now I stand here 11 years later with karma nipping on my heels. Really glad that at the end of this talk you have to wait a year to say something nasty about mine. I somehow got away with that. I don't know why. And then, so you'll notice that these talks, so the one with Michelle, and then Chris and Karen, this would have been before I started transitioning to doing, basically my collaborators became my students. So you'll see the shift in co-authorship happening the next time you see a slide. I didn't find all the old RUME talks I get, but I have a bunch of them here. That would be fun. So that's what that talk looked like. So we're at the middle of the story now. So this is the part that I haven't talked about 100 times, but so I got $10,000. So let's do it. So amazingly, I found people that would do this project with me for nothing, basically. I had one person that I was paying out of this grant, and then we would pay the students that did experiments with it, and then I had a work study student, a mathematician. I don't know how I got away with that, but it was awesome. And so we started by trying to figure out how to get this last big concept into the materials. So Joanna and Elise, my two first PhD students, and I did a design experiment, much like the ones I did with my dissertation, to try and figure out how to support students in reinventing this concept. And then I adapted that basically to my class immediately the next term, because we actually figured out how to do it, and I tried it in my class, and then we did a whole class teaching experiment with a mathematician who agreed to work with us. And so the result was we finished our last unit, and so we had a full curriculum. I'm going to give you a little taste of what that looks like. So here we go. We're going to reinvent quotient groups in about 35 seconds. So it's easy peasy. You just have to know even and odds, and then essentially you're done. Someone actually essentially said that in a paper once, and Ed Dubinsky called it on it hard. So essentially what I did was try to figure out, okay, well, yeah, even and odds, that is like a quotient group. Now how do we get from that to quotient groups? So the way it works is we have students look for something like parity in the symmetries of a square, which they're super familiar with at this time if they've done some materials. And so there's three ways you can break up D8, the symmetries of a square, into evens and odds in ways that make sense as even and odds, actually in multiple different ways. You can look at even and oddness with the powers on the rotations, for example. And also, there's the trivial one, the obvious one, which is the flips and rotation one. But there's two others, and there's fun ways to think about them as even and odds, in addition to the fact that they make a table that looks like that. We have students talk through, okay, are these groups of order 2 then? Because what we want to do is transition them from parity to group structure. And so one way to start that is, okay, there's these things, we actually have put them on little cards. And so the benefit of the little cards here is that you get to see these sets as elements, but then you also can have the individual elements on the cards. There's John, our mathematician colleague, talking through whether that is a group or not. That sets up really the big step, which is, can you break up the symmetries of a square into subsets that form a group with more than 2 elements? And so now you're shifting to thinking about a group as something to structure this other group. Very meta. In fact, that was the word that one of the students that we worked with first came up with for quotient groups, was metagroups. Anyway, so this is a very challenging job, actually, unless you already know quotient groups. Just imagine Elise could tell us how many ways there are to break up a set of 4 things into sets, or 8 things into sets of 2, right? There's a bunch. And so what's cool is as they don't break it up arbitrarily in all the possible ways that Elise could tell them to do it, they try to figure out what has to be the case if it's going to work in the end to give you a group. And it's actually kind of fun because this is a very complicated concept, it turns out, but there's like one high leverage aspect of this job, which is that something has to be the identity subset. And it turns out all the hard parts come from that. If you can make the thing have a subset that works like the identity, you can actually figure out the hard stuff, which is that has to be a subgroup, that the other things have to be cosets, and that subgroup has to be normal. And by the way, going in, we had no idea how to get them to figure out normal, but it turns out focusing on the identity is a good way to do it. Here is a student basically figuring out the algorithm for generating the other elements, and you can sort of see where you get the coset operation from that, and then the definition can be easily attached to that. Anyway, so then you do all of that work, you figure out what the necessary conditions are, essentially, and then things get a little more formal after that in the course. There's lots of details to work out. That's kind of the main points right there. And you can read all about this in Larsen and Lockwood, 2013. Or if you were in RUME in 2007, you could have went to this talk. Well, I made this really cute little wheeling square. for a background. Early in my career, I spent a lot of time on some of these backgrounds for these slides. I actually was up at PME&A one time in the middle of the night for about 2 hours trying to get parquet, like from a basketball court, tried to get it light enough to be the background of the slide, and you could still see it. I did that. I don't ever did it for a room though. I definitely did that. Or you could have seen this later. So there actually is two things here. This is a talk about the collaboration with John, and this was a talk about the local instruction theory that we developed. Anyway, so then what happened when we were just getting started, actually just as we were working with John and his class, we got an NSF grant. And we called it Teaching Abstract Algebra for Understanding, which not coincidentally is the title of this talk. We got a 2.5-year, $200,001 grant. It's research office rounding, and I can tell you, I worried for months that they would just throw the proposal out because that was $1 over the limit for the RFP. I kept asking like everyone, is it going to be okay? Is it going to... Turns out it's okay, and I got an extra $1 out of the government. So anyway, that project was, well, basically because we had already finished the quotient group thing, we had different goals for this project. And it was, basically the main thing was to create a set of instructor support materials, which of course we called innovative, because you have to do that for us to give you money. And then we wanted to study the challenges and opportunities afforded by the curriculum when other people taught the curriculum. Because maybe it only worked for me because I'm like an amazing teacher. It's possible. Anyway, so, and then study how the materials supported learning. So that was the plan for that thing. And so that was awesome. We were just getting ready to start working with John when I got, two other mathematicians in the department wanted to do it as well. So they were like, well, what are we gonna do? We should totally videotape that too, right? So we had 2 in one term, 1 in another term, 1 in another state, and then 1 in the summer term. So we were getting ready to videotape 4 classes. 2 were in the fall, so Joanna did those. And then I got another grant, which I had to get started on. There was horrible attrition with the people that wrote that grant, so I suddenly had all the responsibility for it, so I had to do that one. And worse than that, it was Joanna's dream project, because it was a justification with middle school students, so she basically dumped me. Actually, it's not true. I basically wrote the grant for her, so that was always the plan. And then Elise decided she was ready to finish her dissertation, which was about counting, which she assures me is hard. So she had to focus. Look how many people have gone to your talks over the years. Anyway, so I hired a second-year master's student to take, basically, and then dumped the grant on her is what happened. I hired a student, and then I gave her the grant, and then I did the other grant for a year. That's kind of how that went. So our primary goal was to develop these support materials for the instructors. And so we collected video of every session of four sections. One of those remotely. We had like, what was that thing, technology called? Blackboard or something like that. Anyway, some sort of magic where we could see what he wrote on the board, and we had audio from the remote location. And then Joanna stayed around long enough in the fall to run the first 2, and then Stray took over in the summer. And so why were we doing this? We had 2 goals. One was to do research on what this experience was like for the teachers. What did they need to do it successfully? What did they struggle with? The other was to generate resources for the instructor support materials, which were always intended to be multimedia sort of web-based things. So Estrella took over all of the research on the teaching. So now I'm going to talk about her for a while. So get ready to turn red. So she conducted 3 related studies. First was focused on teacher listening and the role of knowledge of content in students, which came out in a 2012 publication. Then one focused on mathematical activity that mathematicians needed to engage in to work with the students' mathematical ideas. And then finally, a study of the mathematician's experiences teaching with the curriculum, which she co-authored with 3 of the mathematicians at taught. So I'm going to quickly talk about what our findings were on those, and then you can read about the papers if you haven't read them. Shame, if that's the case. So the nature of the curriculum is that the content immersion of the students